Thank you, Michelle. I noticed also as I looked quickly over the participants list that I did see that there are also many school committee parents and school committee members attending with us tonight. We also have quite a few of our special ed leaders, either team chairs, special ed coordinators, some special ed teachers are here with us tonight. So I think that for the most part, I'll be doing most of the responding. We can maybe put some of them on the hot spot, but I just wanted to make note of that so that folks understand that this really is a community effort. This isn't the Chris Smith show, although I am doing the presentation, but special education is, the doing of it all is very much multiple hands, multiple minds, and multiple efforts. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you guys tonight. I've put together a small PowerPoint mostly so that we have something that we can leave up maybe on the website, some information that we can put out in print along with the video that will be recorded from tonight. So first, I welcome you all and hope you are well. I hope that you and your families are staying well and healthy. I know many folks have had COVID scares over the summer where maybe they're quarantining while they await testing. And it's definitely been a very difficult summer for so many families. So I extend my condolences and my best wishes for all of us in the community. Michelle, if you could turn to the next. So as Michelle said, this is our silly little agenda. It is an update of where we've been, where we're going, and an opportunity to ask questions. So during the summer, for those of you who are involved in the extended school year, we did have a small task force committee that came together, and our work was to take the DESE guidance that was coming out and interpret that as we thought about our program. And we tried desperately to get our program open for in-person sessions as of July 27th. That would have given us about 3 weeks for some of our students to be able to participate. It became clear that we were making good progress, but we were definitely not at a place where we were able to and ready to open for the 27th. We then pushed it out another week, and then very quickly we saw that it was still not really going to happen in a way that would make it meaningful to our kids and to our families. We felt like the risk was still too high, meaning we hadn't prepped like the HVAC systems and sort of building technical stuff that we were still getting guidance from DESE on that was revealed all throughout the course of the summer. So while we were in those sessions and trying for that, we did manage to buy PPE. We set up some classrooms. We had signage up. We had procedures written for how to help students use the bathroom or to use or to change students. We had routines in place for drop off and pickup. We had considered van seating and van videos. And I think if you can imagine peeling the layers off of what it takes to get kids back in school once you've closed and getting continuous guidance and updates, it was a lot of information coming at us, and then us trying to interpret that information into WRSD standards or lingo or process, and then get that out into real time. We did meet with the WREA and with the ABA PA union throughout the course of the summer. They had leaned into those conversations, and I think all of it really did set us up for a better position for reopening in the school year. So next slide, Michelle. So as we look into that next school year, what is it that we have left to do? And so we are defining, so over the summer, we mostly looked at the ABA classrooms because those are the kids that really would have gotten the additional 3 weeks. Those are the students that by our documentation are often called our highest need children. And that was defined by the work that the students had done or not been able to do during the closure time, by the teachers and by our administrators. special ed administrators, and also looking at that PL3, which is a placement page that the Department of Special Education uses as part of the IEP process. And I have an example of that that I can show you. So, so that's how we got to that information. So when we gathered all of that information and we think about going into the next school year, we know that our classroom and teaching and learning spaces need to be set up with that 3 to 6 feet of distance between each student and each student's teaching and learning space, that the teaching and learning spaces have to be cleared of all other materials. We have to cover our cubbies that are often made out of a fabric material with something that can be washed down. Materials that students share need to be purchased in duplicate or more so that students don't need to share. These are things that we've learned about over the course of the summer, and we need to implement as we go into the fall and look at it, not just the ABA classrooms, but really looking at the developmental classrooms, the ABA classrooms, the language-based classrooms, the therapeutic learning center classrooms, and then looking at services like Students that Get Wilson and all of these kind of related services also. So that's just a whole ton of work and really important need to make sure that all of this is done, because we're talking about health and safety, right? Throughout that process, we are also talking about training our staff with PPE, obtaining the PPE, getting it in to the buildings to make sure that it fits. We got some strange smelling hand sanitizer that really was disgusting. I think Randy almost passed out from it. It was just awful. And then over the course of the summer, again, we're still getting more and more guidance. As you'll see, one of the bullets in my presentation is talking about now we need to work together with our parents to establish a remote and then hybrid or in-person parent engagement document right there where Michelle is flashing her little mouse around for me. Thank you. And that will be part of what our teachers do as soon as they come back to school. So let's jump into, I'll just finish this slide. So also we have to create van routes that meet our safety guidelines. And then we also need to create an ongoing monitoring process to make sure that we don't run out of PPE at some point. Michelle, do you want me to stop and ask questions, or do you want me to just keep going? I'm afraid if we do questions, I might get mixed up in the slides. And so maybe it's better if I just keep going and you drop comments into the chat, and then Michelle, who has seen the whole presentation, if she knows I'm not going to touch on it at another point, she can give me some, she can ask me to respond to a question.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, and what I will just say is there was a question there's some questions, so we'll keep these noted just so we have them highlighted. So we have Laura mentioned covering out of district children in that process. Will we be covering out of district children? And then a parent, Gina, who would like to, who's concerned about readiness, student readiness, so would like to discuss with the team about student readiness. And then the Allison to discuss the receiving of the parent engagement document. And what I will go ahead and do is all these questions in the chat, I'm actually keeping a separate document right here, so that if we haven't touched on them, as I kind of type up the notes, we'll pull them back over. Also, just for transparency, any questions that are posed this evening, because we have already asked Chris to address as well. Any questions that are asked in the chat that we do not come back with, or that we can't put a written answer to, we will keep that as a follow-up and make sure that that continues to get posted. So for our next meeting, we'll make sure that they continue to get answered. So we want to bring that
Great.
transparency.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next one. Okay, so I wanted to sort of give a little bit of a picture of what will be typical for next year, right? So one of the things that we did for the summer that was atypical is that we didn't promote any of the kids over the summer. So for this school year, we are promoting students to their next grade level, their next classroom, their next teacher, or the next paraprofessional assignment. So that we have that normalcy that happens in September. Things change in September with staffing, and that growth, that change is, we're being very mindful about that, but it is intentional to build those new relationships, to continue to expand our expectations that students will generalize their behavior, their learning, and their growth to new staff. So we are doing that. We are promoting our students. It's the chat can be so distracting. I wish I could turn it off on my end so I don't see it, but I don't know how to do that. So anyway, I try not to look at it. So when I start to sort of flutter off like that, it's because I've seen the chat and I'm trying not to look at it. So
Okay.
forgive me.
No, just one question, Chris, and
Sure.
we can answer this at the end. When we talk about progressing all to the next year, Gina had a question around if she didn't believe her child would be able to progress to the next grade. Would that be a discussion? How can she address that? Is that a blanket statement, or can she address that with the
Oh, no.
team? Like,
Yeah.
what would that process be?
Thank you for clarifying that, Michelle. Okay,
Mhm.
so anything that I say in any presentation can be different for an individual child. So that like needs to be the major caveat to anything you put out in special education. Any conversation can be superseded by a conversation or undone by a conversation in an IEP meeting. So please keep that in mind. Um, Students will be promoted. Promotion doesn't happen as part of an IEP process. We are not responsible ever for retaining or promoting a student. That happens based on their enrollment in school or their age or any of those factors. So if you have concerns about promoting your child, that would be a conversation you would take up probably with the building principal, and make some considerations around that. I believe that in this process of remote to hybrid to, full days, our students should be working with their teachers daily, and that they should also have independent work to do, whatever that might look like for their developmental age. Um, Parents and teachers, we cannot do our work without each other. We really can't, particularly in this crazy time of COVID, where we are, as educators, the roadmap makers, but our parents are often the facilitators of that learning. And so we really need this incredibly rich partnership. And the only way to get that is to really lean into each other, and with lots of trust and transparency, to say, or like Michelle said at the beginning of this, I'm not very good at this. I do this all day, but here I am and I'm screwing it up. And, we have to be able to get help for what we're not good at, and ask for help, or try new things. I can't tell you the amazing learning that I've seen happen from our educators here in Wachusett. They have, whether it's new tech programs or managing how to maneuver new tech programs through various technologies it's just been amazing. It's just been an amazing learning process for lots and lots of people. I would say that, as we know, there have been lots and lots of children that have had less because of the COVID crisis, and we are hoping to be able to address those issues and move our children forward. That's really our goal for this school year, and that is our goal every school year, but we know this year that that is even more of a challenge because we know the gap is bigger. Throughout the remote time, we expect that our students will see and hear and engage with their peers as a part of their typical school day. I just want to make sure that that's out there as a statement, that we know that peers are just as important to our special ed students as they are to any of our regular ed students. You can turn that. And so if I was talking about how school feels typical, I feel like I should also talk about how school will feel really different. I think one of the most concerning initial aspects of that is that, first of all, our kids haven't been in school, so that's going to be really, really different for them. Their staff are going to be wearing PPE, which is going to be really different. Health and safety have always been of the utmost importance in our schools. That governs a lot of what we do on a daily basis. But I have to say, at this time, it is of the utmost importance. We will be teaching our students how to wear their masks, how to take a break from their masks, how to tolerate their masks longer over time. The classrooms are empty mostly of anything that's extra. That allows for better cleaning and allows for maximum seating. Students during this time obviously will be using computers or tablets to receive remote or hybrid instruction. And in our vans, we have moved from using car seats to using 5-point harnesses that will be installed into the vans and not be removed on a daily basis. If other students are using that space, those harnesses can be moved out of the way or sat upon. They don't need to be unbuckled from the car seat, from the cars or the vans themselves. And these 5-point harnesses are also used by other towns and have been used successfully for many, many years in other towns. We can still use the buckle buddies with those or any other adaptations we have in our IEPs. Okay, next screen, Michelle. Oh, I took some pictures of what our rooms are looking like right now. So this is an ABA classroom, and the way that it's being designed is this is a teaching table where students would sit together with an adult to learn. You'll see that all of the tables are facing in the same direction. And then within that cubby space, you can see in the second image there, in the second row of seats there, you can see that there are some toys and items on the shelves. So that actually would be the students' individual play space, or the space where they can take and earn breaks instead of out in the open part of the classroom. That will still be available, but that might look different so that
Thank you.
we
Goodbye.
did, I'm not sure who's unmuted right now. Is that a question for me, or should I just keep going? Let's see.
Nope, I think you can keep going, Chris.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So I wanted you to see that classroom. That's an ABA classroom over at Houghton. Could you go to the next screen? This is a preschool classroom. You'll see that there are stations set up around the classroom with a pretty good amount of space in front of each or between each station. And I think the sit-upons are for students to identify those marked spaces. Could you go to the next screen? This is this is the preschool classroom, again, set up so that we get the maximum distance for the students, but then they would be able to engage with each other. Next screen, please. This is an image of Fred Flintstone's PL3. It's a little fuzzy here, but it is actually an IEP document that the state uses to determine what we call the level of need of a student. So what we do when we are calculating the amount of time a student spends out of general education, that's how we determine the level of need. So if you look at this document, you'll see that there's a place to check off in general ed classrooms, in and out of gen ed classrooms, out of gen ed classrooms. And then a kind of service provider, and then the percentage of time that the student is out of gen ed classrooms. Because remember, special education is our intention is to work to the least restrictive environment. And when we remove students from that gen ed environment, we are ultimately changing their access and need to define that very carefully through the IEP. And that's what you can see the PL3 does. Go ahead,
Chris,
Michelle.
this is great. I have a question though.
Sure.
So this document, has the PL3 for each student already been generated? Is the level of need already been calculated for each special student with an IEP?
Yes, so it's actually a document that we don't send home as part of the IEP in most of our schools. There may be an occasion where it gets slipped in. We use this data that this generates for other reports. So each one of our students has a PL3. It's basically a summary, if you will, of the information that's already on an IEP. So again, you're determining you're calculating if the student's level of service is under 25% of the program time, between 25 and 75% of the program time, or over 75 of the program time. So that by program time, they mean school day. So that would determine mild, moderate, and severe or intensive needs. That's basically how the state defines that for special education.
Excellent. And a following question to that. So this is a percentage that's already been generated for each student. So of the 1,000 we have, this already exists. So to that point, based on the need, when would a parent be notified of what their child's PL is? Is that something that will be communicated to parents, what their child's PL3 percentage is, in order to communicate when they could expect to receive services? Like, are we building a timeline based on 75%, 50%, 25%? How would that be calculated?
Yeah, so in the school committee presentation that I did, the children that are 75% or over are they're phase 1 students. Phase 2 are the moderate kids, and so that's the 25 to 75%. And then phase sort of 2.5 would be the most mild kids. So we didn't have a plan to communicate specifically this percentage, and I'm sharing this because it's a way for parents to open their own child's IEP and really understand how the district is calculating that level of need, because it's based on the amount of time a student is in or out of the gen ed setting.
Great, thank you. And again, if any more questions on the PL3, feel free to pop them into the chat, and we're capturing notes as we go along. So again, thank you for this, and again, we'll be compiling this as we go along. So thank you. You can continue.
Sure, you can flip that screen. So I've now have about 4 or 5 slides in here specific to an IEP grid, because there's I want to be as transparent as possible in all things. And so what we are expecting from our special education teachers is to, when they are back with us, they will have your child's service delivery grid, which this is a copy of somebody's from their IEP, and the teacher will look at this, look at what classes the student is assigned to, and determine how to provide these services, which is what teachers do every single year when they get their caseload. That is absolutely no different than, that beginning of the school year time when teachers are building their schedule. In most of our buildings, the schedules are not built before the SPED teachers come back to their buildings to do that work. So what I mean by that is, a 4th grader who's getting some pull-out reading services, this may, depending on their service grid, they may be going to that reading class and getting some pull-out service. So the teacher, the special ed teacher and the gen ed teacher negotiate when is the best time to deliver that service. So I just want to walk you guys through the service delivery grid so that it's really clear, or as clear as I can make it, and you can definitely ask me questions if I'm not being clear. So the A grid, so before you flip screens there, Michelle, could you just move your cursor over this grid here where it says ABC? right?
Yes, yep, okay, yep, ABC right here in the category.
So those that ABC are that tells us where the service is supposed to take place in a typical school year. A always represents consult services. B always represents inclusion services. And C always represents pull-out services. So could you go to the next page for me?
Of course, and I know we asked, okay, perfect. Just to, and I know you've addressed this in the presentation and even questions at the end, but just one of the questions we had was, of the consult, inclusion, or pull-out services, if we could highlight, are there any services that, we may not be able to deliver to the full standard, or are there any that, may need to be phased in given, for example, OT. We can't deliver OT right away due to XYZ, but here's the time frame in which we're going to do that. So
Sure.
if you want to comment on that through the presentation.
Yeah, and I have a response to that at the end too. So hold on to that thought.
Nope, absolutely. Thank you.
So again, the A-grid services, they are the consult services. And again, those services are when the teachers are talking to each other or when the teachers are consulting with the parents. They may be in our ABA program, we have some clinics that happen. And I believe those services end up also on the A-grid. All of that should be happening in the remote service or in the hybrid service or in in-person service, that all of that consultation should still be happening. It may be that the clinic team decides not to meet in person, but to meet remotely. Or for some teams, they may decide to meet in person. We are not putting any restrictions on those meetings, but definitely we would like to limit them, but we are not going to exclude any parent from coming in to participate into our building for
Great.
those meetings.
I had one question, Chris. So from a timing perspective, the timing, you mentioned teachers will come back in the building on September 1st. And I know that they'll, you address this at the end, they'll be getting their full caseload. So all special ed teachers will get their final full caseload when they come back in the building. Is it reasonable to expect that parents would not, we would not be starting any of the meetings until either after September 1st or after the September 16th? Like when is the first time parents could reasonably schedule a meeting to talk about parent clinic meetings or even team meetings?
So team meetings shouldn't start before the 16th. Your new team of providers won't know your child and won't really have much to contribute to that conversation. I know parents are eager to share information with their teachers, with their child's teacher, and parents always can call a team meeting, and we have 10 days to put that meeting together and let you know when that meeting can happen. But that cannot happen out of session. Those 10 days will not even start until September 16th.
When can they request a team? Is the first time a request will be entertained, like so that 10 days would start essentially on the first day of school if they were to put that in. So it's not, you can't request it now for the 16th, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So prior to that, what my expectation, and I'll be outlining this to our teachers once I get the DESE form, I'm thinking back to that engagement form. So the point of that engagement document is to document that our teachers have been in contact with their individual parents and have determined together what the service and how the service is going to be provided during the remote time and then also during the hybrid time or the transition into the transition into in-person services. So that really it won't be a full team meeting, but it will be an opportunity for parents to engage directly with their liaison and their providers about service. Okay, could you go to the next slide? So we've talked about the consult A grid. The B grid is the services that are done in the inclusion setting. So every year when a new liaison gets their schedule, they have to figure out how they are providing the service to students in the inclusion setting. That means sometimes a paraprofessional is deployed because the special ed teacher and the paraprofessional have worked closely to discuss what the needs of the IEP are. And sometimes that's a special educator going into a gen ed classroom to provide the IEP services. While we are in remote, that should be happening by a special ed teacher or a paraprofessional joining the remote class session to be a support or to provide reteaching, accommodations, direct instruction, presenting the material in multiple ways. Maybe it's in a Google breakout room. Maybe it's by participating. Maybe the SPED teacher is behind the scenes making modifications so that that lesson is accessible to the students, and the student maybe not even aware that that has happened. But maybe, for example, it's a student that has speech and language and has word finding issues. And so when the class is presented with a test, there's always a vocabulary box accessible to the student. And that may not have been the way the gen ed teacher would have been presenting, but because of this particular student and because of their collaboration with the special ed teacher, that is now the modality and an accommodation that's provided to all students in that classroom, to ensure that the special ed student that needs that is also getting it. So those accommodations, that the time that the paraprofessional or the special ed teacher spends in the inclusion classroom should be directed towards what their students' goals and objectives are on their IEP, or what their accommodations or changes in methodology are, so that the student can access the gen ed curriculum that's being presented in the gen ed classroom. In Wachusett, we have, not unlike many districts, we have used the IEP for a scheduling tool. What I mean by that is, if a student has, let's say, math inclusion, it ends up on the IEP and it ends up on there for 45 minutes because that's how long the class is, and it's 5 days a week. The reality is that the student probably doesn't require 45 minutes of direct instruction on those goals and objectives that are in their IEP for math. And so we end up providing that special ed support or instruction for the duration of the math class, because that's the most convenient way to provide it, is to use the IEP as a scheduling tool. But if we get more specific and more sophisticated in our IEP development, we should be able to say, this is the change that the student requires, and this is how much time should be spent daily or weekly on that in the gen ed setting. So it might look more like 40 minutes over the course of a week, because it really doesn't require 45 minutes every single day. However, that's not how we're writing IEPs at this point. We are writing them as a scheduling tool. So you should expect as a parent that your student is getting the kind of service that's described on their IEP, even in the remote setting. As we move to in-person services, we may have the occasion, and we will have the occasion, where we have a student who is in the building and is scheduled to have a reading class. Let's say it's a TLC student, a Therapeutic Learning Center student, and they typically go to the inclusion classroom for reading every day. So what will they do? They're now in the building. There are no inclusion students in the building at this point in my fictitious demonstration. And so they would log on with an adult from the TLC program to that virtual classroom and participate as an inclusion student in that classroom. In fact, that may be how some of our students continue even as inclusion students come back into the buildings, because we need to consider how we are containing the pods of students that are interacting. So that's still to be determined, but it can happen that a student would be in the building and doing some virtual classes in order to get that inclusion time. Michelle, did you have a question?
Oh, there we go, muted, okay. So just one clarification point. For example, if there's a 45 minutes, could you just speak to, how are you determining if you have to reduce, the grid B, right? If it's not 45 minutes, it's only 30 minutes due to restrictions. Is that something that's going to be individually discussed with that child's team and their parent?
Yes, all of that needs to be discussed with the child's team. It's not my expectation to be making any of those changes during this time. If the grid says 45 minutes and the student requires 45 minutes for academic instruction or academic access, then that's what should be happening. I'll give this one caveat. If a student has a paraprofessional there because of behavior or attention, that should be discussed with how we provide that support should be discussed with the liaison and the family, because it may not be necessary in the remote environment to provide 45 minutes of support. This is our example for the math class, 45 minutes of support during that math class, if in fact the student may be doing better in the remote environment, or maybe they're not doing well and they need something different. Maybe during the remote environment, they need an opportunity to work in a much smaller group. So that needs to be discussed with the parent and with the liaison as the school year unfolds.
Great. And do you need a team meeting to do that? Or is that something that a parent can discuss? Is there some kind of formal process? Or, if I'm asking about my son, I reach out to the teacher or to the team chair. What does that process look like?
So the initial contact would be with your child's liaison. Then that would, there would be a conversation between the teacher and the parent about what that looks like. And it doesn't have to be, it has to be a conversation where everybody's listening. It has to be an opportunity to say, I don't know your student yet, or I do, and for the parent to say, I do know what my student needs. And because of our mandate to least restrictive, we have to start with the least restrictive and provide increasingly more restrictive services. So as a parent, you may know that the best thing for your student is to be pulled out of that classroom and be taught one-to-one. But that might actually not be the best thing for your student because of factors that you may not be aware of within the educational system. For example, it's a violation of the student's rights to pull the student out of the gen ed classroom without documentation that tells us that that's what the student needs because they have demonstrated that need. Additionally, if a student, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. If a student is pulled out and what they miss in that gen ed classroom is the rich dialogue that happens between the peers and the teacher, and that ebb and flow that can really change the way a student is able to participate because of that gen ed classroom. So it's hard to envision how it would be better for a student who's particularly needy, who has fallen behind, to be in that gen ed classroom, but there really is a lot more to be gained in a gen ed classroom than in a special ed classroom. So I just put that out there for our parents who will be engaging in those conversations, and our staff who may come back and say, I want more time with them in the gen ed setting before I pull them out more, or let's try this in this setting before we get more restrictive. I'm not sure.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Slide, next one, thank you. So the last section of the IEP service delivery grid is the C grid services. those are the services that students are removed from the gen ed classroom and receive those services in a separate setting that's defined as a special education setting by a special education teacher. That instruction is usually very specific to the type of disability that the student has. It should be very specific to their goals and objectives in their IEP. We should be taking data on their progress, and all of that should be so that we can then return them back to the gen ed setting as soon as possible. So in the remote modality, what does that look like? That is where our special education teachers, they do this every year. Again, they take their caseload and they look at it and they figure out, okay, when can I see this student? How is this going to work? Okay, I need these 2 third graders for 2 sessions of math. I can take them, I don't want to take them out of their math class, so I'm going to take them out of this time or that time, or I'm going to catch them in between this time. Our teachers are amazingly sophisticated at creating these schedules that limit the amount of time that students miss instruction or what I would call, enjoyment or social time with their peers. Maybe that was snack. Maybe they were able to do, a peer interaction over snack rather than take a student out of an academic block. So our special ed teachers will be coordinating with their gen ed peers to create these very sophisticated schedules for the remote time, for the hybrid time, and for the in-person time. And parents will be fully engaged in those conversations through that engaged parent engagement document, and be aware of how are we going to do this.
And those, that date that they would get that update, it would be after September 1st, but before September 16th, Chris?
Correct.
Before start of school year, they will know how service is delivered.
Yes.
Correct, okay.
So C-grid services in the hybrid, this is another screen to sort of describe that if we have students in the building for remote services, for in-person services, that they may actually be remoting virtually into an inclusion classroom that is being presented from an ELA teacher that doesn't have any kids in front of her because she's presenting it virtually. So we would have the opportunity to support our students having those classes. This is again a note about the parent engagement and student learning plan. We are awaiting that form from DESE. It was in the form of some questions last week when we had our statewide directors meeting. We have another directors meeting on the 20th. As soon as I get that information, I will be sharing that with my staff so that they can be thinking about what that looks like. And they will be reaching out to you to engage in those conversations. Again, it's a plan that should be developed on an individual basis and delivered to our families electronically within the first few weeks of teachers returning to school. Obviously, we're going to insist that all students have those plans in place before school starts. I've heard this question asked and I wanted to address it full on. How my child has a one-to-one, how will that work? So in most cases, our students that have one-to-ones are our students who are our most complex students. So they are most likely our students who will be in during phase 1 of in-person services. Our parents can expect that if that assistance is that they need that assistance for one-to-one academic instruction and access to the curriculum, that would be fully supported during the remote period. That might mean that if the student is still remote, that might mean synchronous learning. It might mean that the one-to-one is participating with the child during asynchronous time. If that one-to-one is there, again, for behavior or for attention, and it's really more support during that inclusion time, that really needs to be discussed with your liaison so that we can deploy these people our paraprofessionals and our special ed teaching staff to our students who need them the most during the remote model. That can change when we're in person. We've had many students that have been more successful in remote learning because it is remote. And then we've had students that are not successful because it's remote. So we want to be able to be responsive to that and flexible to what our kids need. None of that changes the IEP. Let me just make that clear. Like, we're not making amendments to IEPs for that. If, let's say you have a student who has a one-to-one because they have a medical condition, let's say a seizure disorder, and they need really intensive supervision when they're in the school building because they could get hurt. And we have a one-to-one identified for that student. If that student is fully remote, that one-to-one is not necessary because there is someone at home monitoring that student because of the student's level of need that's already in place. So we would want to be able to release that resource to somebody else at this time who may need more support because it's remote. And that doesn't need to change the student's IEP at all. We would document that in the parent engagement form, that during remote, this is what's happening, during hybrid, this is what's happening. And that can change, but the IEP does not change. I'm all set, Michelle. So now I have a few slides about our individual programs. I was aware that postgrad wasn't included on the grid that I presented to school committee. I think it confuses people when you're not in the world of special education, but we are in the world of special education, and not having it there was a bother to me. We also didn't have preschool, which was also a bother to me. But so I wanted to specifically address postgrad students. Our postgrad students would follow all of this information that I've shared thus far, and they would be considered same as our high school students. Obviously, that's where our postgrad program resides at this time. Michelle asked earlier, what are some of the services that we wouldn't be able to provide in remote? And our community-based vocational experiences is definitely one of the areas that we have been limited in at this point. I don't know if that will be expanded as we return to school. I think as we see what the rates of infection are doing, we can determine how we can get students out into community-based vocational experiences that are controlled or carefully monitored, especially for our older students who are able to maintain, proper PPE. We would like to get them out as soon as possible. Go ahead. So we have a pretty big developmental life skills program throughout Wachusett. And that's because we have over time included students in our developmental program that spend anywhere from no time in the inclusion setting to almost a whole day in the inclusion setting, which is a good thing because it shows that we have a good range of growth for our students that are in those programs. We always want to be pushing our students back into the gen ed setting as much as possible, as soon as possible. So for our developmental students, we will be using the level of need form, the PL3, and identifying our students using that by the phases to get them back in. So if your student is part of the developmental program, it's not an automatic that they're going to be back during phase 1, because they may really be a moderate kid that's using the support of the developmental program, or they may really be a more intensive kid that's using the developmental program. So our staff will be using, the amount of time, again, the amount of time a student spends in the inclusion setting really determines what phase the student is going to re-enter school in. Our ABA program classrooms are most typically, that's where our neediest students are educated. However, we do have some students that use the ABA classrooms as a home base as they go to many inclusion classes. So again, we'll be using phase 1 will be our most intensive students, and they'll come in for their day and have those discrete trials and individual one-to-one sessions with very close contact with adults. Go ahead. Again, the same issue is true, or not issue, but same situation is true for our language-based learning center students. They may be a student that spends the majority of the time in the gen ed classroom. Our language-based students will be coming in either the first or second phase of reopening. The same is true for our therapeutic learning center students. There we may continue to see many students engaging in their gen ed classes in a virtual setting. So they may be in school attending a virtual class supported by their self-contained teachers. The preschool is part of the neediest category as defined by the state or by DESE at this time. The mandate was to get our neediest students and our preschool students back into school. As you may or may not remember, for some of you who are far away from preschool, when a student turns 3, they are eligible for public schools depending on their level of need, and as they age out of home-based services through through EI. And there's been a slowdown on all of that during the COVID time, and the dates for admission, the EI services continued while school was closed, and there's a time in October where all of that has to shift back to schools. So we intend to have our little neediest ones in the building as soon as possible to get them back into their routines as we start to see that influx of other students coming into us from the EI programs, as those programs are getting back on track with their proper referrals. I know that Andrea has already put out, excuse me? Okay. Andrea has already conceived of how she will present. Andrea is the principal over at the preschool, and as she designs the preschool reentry, she's thinking heavily about related services being provided remotely or virtually, even though everybody's in the same building, and that is to limit the amount of contagion or cross-contamination between adults and children. So Michelle, as you were asking at the beginning, what services cannot be provided, I would venture to say at this point that there aren't any services that can't be provided. There are, though, although there are services that we will not be providing in person as a way to limit contagion. We are concerned about that cross-contamination between the adult coming into a new space with children and the potential for that to be a spreading factor. So some of our students, as they're receiving in-person instruction, will be getting virtual SLP, OT, or PT, and that would be done with the assistance of classroom staff. So you asked a whole bunch of questions that I have on the next, I think, 3 slides, and then we can open it up to other questions. So one of the questions was, when will teachers know their special education caseloads? And teachers have a sense of that because most of our buildings are very similar to how they were last year, meaning we didn't have a lot of turnover in special education teachers, or in related service providers for that matter. So when they return to their buildings on September 1st, they will officially have their caseload. When can families expect to be contacted about their Iep timeline? So Michelle, I didn't really understand this question. I wasn't sure what you were asking in that. Could you flesh that out for me a bit?
Sure, of course. And I think that absolutely first just want to thank you because that was a lot of information, and I appreciate you really expanding on it. So just want to thank you there. And again, thank you to this team, all the great questions in the chat. So when it comes to, I'm very much a timeline person. I love dates. I think I keep talking about dates all the time. So it just, know when we're going to know is really helpful, especially for, the planning aspect. So when I talk about the IEP timeline, I think you spoke to it because it was really more, number one, knowing when could team meetings start, which we know is the 16th. When are we going to be contacted by teachers, which I believe you said was between the 1st and the 16th. When we would start to be contacted by our liaison and flushing out what does that full range of services look like. So I'm starting to piece together some of those timelines, and I know that in the larger presentation you have the phased approaches, no sooner than October 5th, etc. So I think the ones that I wanted clarification on, just based on this conversation, was around, again, are you going to have updates, when we talk about some of these different services that will be delivered either remotely or in person, will there be a phased approach, right? Where you say, speech, we can do in-person OT, but speech will continue to be phased in not before October 5th, right? Do we have a picture of that? Is it, is it across the board type of thing? Like, so it's just, how can we keep families up to date as to, when they're going to get the specifics, or is it is going to be that?
That's really good and important questions. I think that I don't have those answers at this point, because at this point, what I don't know is like how many of my, what if 2 of my SLPs are medically fragile to this and aren't able to return to school but can work remotely, and what's my district-wide responsibility to that, or those are the pieces that I think still remain fuzzy to me around our next steps and how we can assure what the modality of service delivery without knowing what our teachers' capacities are at this point. I think that's where we're in those conversations right now with our unions and with our negotiations.
Okay. One question to that. So the PL3 score determines the phase. When could a parent, can a parent reach out to understand their child's PL3 score or percentage prior to September 1st, such that they would know which phase they're in?
Sure. So, Carol Hume is on this call. Kim Paquette at the high school is here. Any of our team chairs, everybody's back in the buildings on Monday or Tuesday of next week. So you can email your team chair, you can email us up at the Special Education Central Office. But it's pretty easy to determine just by looking at your student's IEP. But we absolutely would welcome those conversations if that's helpful to families, for sure.
Great, thank you. And again, I'm looking to just call out one question Laura had was from an out-of-district perspective, how are some of the timelines going to be, are they going to follow the same timelines in terms of communication with the team chair, with any of the folks within district, and then out of district, how will that work?
So with out-of-district families, Lincoln is mostly the contact for most of our families, but Carol has a caseload, I have a caseload, and if the school is open or not open, we're still, students are still enrolled, so we are collaborating with those schools to ensure that the remote plan is in place and that students are getting services. So as an out-of-district parent, you should get this parent engagement is across all special education services. So you should definitely be in touch. You should have a conversation with your out-of-district school, and you should get the parent engagement form and really know how those services are being provided.
Great, and we will keep close tabs. We'll keep updating the FAQ, the timeline. So we'll keep also close tabs on the DESE parent engagement form. So we'll keep that updated on our on the site. So as we get more info, that's great. And again, we welcome any more questions too in the chat. And again, if we are not able to answer this evening, right now, we will keep a running document and continue to add to it. So
great. The next question is, when will families know their teachers? And I saw that Tammy, who is the principal out at Thomas Print, is on. Tam, do you mind popping on your microphone? Are you still out there?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you. Tammy, can you help me understand, when do families know their teacher assignments?
Yep. So in terms of, are we talking about inclusion teachers or special, if kids are, pulled for special ed services?
I would say both. Can we start
Okay.
with how does a
Sure.
gen ed student, how do you find out who your gen ed placement
Yep.
is?
Absolutely. So typically Power School is opened around the third or fourth week of August. So at that time, parents can go in and see their kids' schedule. I would caution that, the schedule in Power School right now is not necessarily going to look exactly like the remote learning schedule. Obviously the times will be different, but the periods will be the same, especially for the upper grades. But for the elementary grades, it's typically more like, an ELA, math, science, social studies. So, they'll find out the gen ed inclusion teacher at that time. And then, the specialists are assigned, prior, obviously, to the opening of the school year. And those may or may not be on Power School, depending if, so for instance, at Thomas Prince, if a student is pulled out at the middle school level for English language arts, the special ed teacher would be the teacher of record. And that's the person who does the grading and such. So that would be listed on Power School as that teacher. But at the younger, levels, the younger grades, that person might not be listed on Power School because they might be the child might be getting, if the typical ELA block in a typical school day was 90 minutes and the students pulled out for 30 minutes for support, the regular ed teacher is still the teacher of record, so will be listed on Power School. So I know that was a lengthy answer, but just, I also can share that at our school, we do plan to, during those 10 days of professional development prior to the September 16th opening, I've built in some time for all of my teachers to reach out to families, and that includes, gen ed and specialists, to have some large group meetings as well as some smaller individual meetings with families and students. Does
Thank you.
that help?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, great question. Great. Thank you, Tammy, and thank you, Chris. For Power School, is that global, that it'll be open for all buildings, or is it building specific?
It's district wide. Typically it opens for the high school a day or two early than the K to 8s. But it's typically, across the entire system, it opens at the same time. And I apologize, I don't have the exact date, but usually there is a communication sent out to families alerting them. Well, not usually, definitely there's a communication sent out to families alerting them that Power School is now open and available for parents and students to view their schedules.
Except not preschool.
Perfect.
Right.
I'm hearing from the elementary principals that they're looking for the September 9th date for the Power School to be open for families. So that's
September 9th?
last I heard. Yeah, September 9th.
Thank
So
you.
we think it's tentatively September 9th is the date?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, because of the later opening, it makes sense that it would be extended a little bit. But like I said, I know that teachers, at least teachers are going to be reaching out to families during that 2-week prior to the opening, just to, make connections and build relationships.
Thank you.
Great, that's awesome. I know we're all excited to get into Power School, so that's definitely, it absolutely helps.
On another note, just if I can share, there will be a meeting that we need to have in September to talk about the fact that special education is now in Power School. We have transitioned from Frontline or Eastbed to Power School special programs, which means that parents will now find everything in one portal and will be able to send IEPs home through Power School special programs. We're moving towards DocuSign and being able to sign IEPs that way. So all of that was very much in the works before COVID happened, but so there's lots coming that way for changes for Power School and how we keep our data.
Wow, that's great news, Chris. We'll definitely keep updated on that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
So another question you asked, well, these questions are here. I don't know if you want to throw some at me from the chat. I know I have a hard stop at 8 o'clock. I don't know if anybody, I figured that was an okay time. But.
This is great. Let me pop through. So, and because you have these recorded, and again, we'll have these published out right away, so folks can go through and look. What decisions is the superintendent? Okay, sorry, I just, I had to ask that. Okay, let's see. One of them is creative solutions. So while you're, answering that, and then maybe home services.
Sure.
Is that being talked about with the unions for home services? Because, and what, what's the probability that could look like, and what's, yep.
So we are trying to be absolutely as creative as possible. And this sort of goes hand in hand with the next question around home services. So I will tell you that it is highly unlikely that we will be sending WREA or paraprofessionals that are employed by Wachusett or ABA teachers or ABA providers into our families' homes at this point. However, there have been occasions where the district has been responsive to what families need and have provided home-based services, but not with our employees. So we've done tons of out-of-the-box kind of plans and services over the course of the summer. I think this sort of also speaks to your very last question. The last one on this slide is what do we need from our parents? And what I need is timely feedback. I need my building team chairs, my coordinators, and myself to be made aware when things are going well and when things are not going well. You've got to talk to your liaisons, your building principals, parents. Please lean in and tell us what's working and what's not working, because that is the only way we can address your concerns. I think I'm not on the Facebook site. I don't know the chatter that is happening. I can't solve anything that's not brought to me. But I think if you have had a chance to engage with me, I think that you will find that I'm looking for solutions. I'm looking for ways to make things possible so that everybody is having access to school.
Thank you, Chris. And we couldn't agree more. Again, no one can hear what you're thinking. That's, I say for me, I'm like, that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? If that
can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Good thing and a bad thing. I think that's for all of us, right? So, and again, it's always with the intent that we want to solve the problem and address it. And I think for the CPAC, what we will also help step into is just transparency, right? If there are ongoing open issues, we want to have a running list. We want transparency. We want to be able to say, look, we're hearing these issues, we're bubbling them up. I think we go back to the nursing at the beginning of last year, really being able to bring that up and make sure that we continue to follow up. And then eventually, a position was open. So that's, again, that is the power of what we can all collectively do when we communicate. But, it has to be in a central place, and we have to just keep bringing it up and following up and staying on the same page. So.
And I think some of that, when we get waylaid, I just want to, and this is sort of mentioned on the slide previous, like we're really thin staffed in Wachusett. I compare this district to a very good friend of mine is a director in another district of comparable size. And I can't tell you how many other people there are to do the work of running a district compared to Wachusett. And, you know, for me, I'm like, you know, designing PD for paraprofessionals at the same time that I'm selecting what size masks and gowns do I need, at the same time trying to figure out, you know, can we bus these kids in? What does that look? I mean, there's just, your head is like gonna explode, never mind like sorting out curriculum and HVAC and you know, I've always said way before COVID, closing school and opening school is an expensive and unnecessary and exhausting process. We should just do what corporate America does and just roll it into the net. But no, we close down, we spend all this time opening up. It's exhausting. And I have to tell you, it takes a Herculean effort under normal circumstances, never mind under COVID with the thin staff that we have. And I'd like to say I am thin, but I'm not, but you know, we are thinly staffed. There we are.
And we thank you too, Chris. I mean, just, you know, so much we are so much in, you know, our teachers, we're all locked arms, right, to bring this. So,
right,
you know, we definitely are grateful. And we do have a statement actually from the ABA PA
group.
Jen Lines, which I will attach this. I won't be able to read it right now, but she offered a very sweet and heartfelt, as well as Mary Shepard from the WREA offered. So we'll make sure that's attached here. What I want to address, the question came up is testing. Could you speak more to testing? Will testing be in person? How will reevaluations happen?
So over the course of the summer, that was one of the things that we did actually succeed in getting to happen. So some testing has already begun. In fact, today I sent out another email to providers in the district asking if anybody wants to test. We didn't have a huge buy-in. People really, after the closure in the spring that we had, people really needed a break. But I thought I would send it out today as people are gearing up again for school and see. And I did get a few bites. So I hope to have some more testing happening. Testing can happen in person even when school is reopening. So as of the 16th, I, you know, hope to start seeing testing getting scheduled and parents either bringing students in or figuring out how to bus students in for testing. We won't be doing remote testing. We might do remote observation, but not standardized testing in the remote environment. We would ask for students to come in for that.
Okay, great. And to clarify, so no remote testing at this time, but we may do possible remote observation based on this the students.
Sure.
Need.
Yeah.
And how? Perfect. How is evaluations being prioritized? Is it kind of first come, first serve?
It's a nightmare. Let me just tell you, it's a nightmare.
Right.
Really the backlog. I think we did do some file reviews for the fall. It will have to be, we have to manage timelines. We're not exempt from federal timelines. So it's going to be all hands on deck trying to get them done. I would say if we need to do it, we do it. And otherwise we're looking at doing a file review if we can do that until we get to a point where we're really assured that kids have readjusted to school and providers are able to do a standardized battery that really feels that they feel like is reflective of students' strengths and weaknesses. You know, it's not a great time to ask for like a cognitive evaluation. Educational evals or academic achievement evaluations, or even academic assessments that are not standardized but are used more to determine areas of growth or current level of performance on an IEP. Those can be done by special ed teachers or by special ed teachers. In some cases, they're done by gen ed teachers as part of their general practice. And that might give you a snapshot of, okay, when we left school, my student was on level D, and now they have regressed and they are on B. Those kind of the BAS assessment or the DRA. I think mostly we do the BAS assessment in our district. Those are assessments that are done by both special ed and gen ed teachers that will give us a snapshot as to if the area of loss, I think. But if we're looking at standardized formal testing to determine an area of disability, that really should be done when a student's educational program is stable again.
Great, thank you. Now, speaking to the October 5th date, it was said that, essentially phase 1 would be no sooner than the October 5th date. But is there, what is the possibility and the steps to get, the highest need students in first, right? Do you see, is there any possibility there based on current state today?
I wanted them in on July 27th, Michelle, so I can tell you that it has been a heartache for me that we didn't make it to get them in July. So I think that we're looking at, I think the biggest problem right now, I would say, is the HVAC system. And I think getting our general population over the hurdle of what does it feel like to be in school again, and how do we make that feel safe again? I would say those are the two biggest hurdles for us.
No, and I know, and I just want to give it, what I do want to say is that I'm really proud of the work that the ESY task force did this summer. I think that it is, dates were set, Chris, and even if it was difficult, there are factors beyond the control to actually make the date. It was not for not having a solid plan and having a communication plan and being transparent. And I really just want to drive that point home, that my expectation is that as a district that we adopt that model, that we set dates, we work as hard as we can, we bring transparency, but we need to draw a line in the sand and be really transparent. So I'm really proud of that work over the summer of that task force and that, attempt, because at least it gave parents an idea. So even if you swing and you miss, at least you got up to bat.
Thank you.
So very passionate about that. All right. So I think, and I know we're just coming up, we have about 5 more minutes. I'm just taking a look to see if anything I haven't addressed. I know one other question, just because we covered it at the top of the meeting, was just around the grid services, A, B, and C. Again, they can be delivered remotely, right? So even if it's a hybrid, it can still be delivered remote. So for example, elementary speech and math and ELA, the student could be in person, but they could still be delivered remotely if that's what that teacher was able to do, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then Nicole made a great question. Is the district looking to hire outside to help with testing for service and, and evaluate students?
Yes, we have a couple of contract service providers that we do use, and we will continue to lean on if we need to. But in fact, over the summer, I have engaged a contract for some testing.
Okay, so there is, and just to clarify, the messaging around requesting initial testing or retesting until settling, is there a policy that's going into place? Is there an official policy? No,
I would never create a policy on that. Parents have a right to request testing, and in Massachusetts, it's pretty hard to refuse it. So we would like to be moving as a district to using less standardized testing, more data that comes from the actual classroom, from the participation of our students in our curriculum. That has been a pendulum that's been swinging in the world of school psychologists forever. Right now we're at the side of lots of standardized testing, and we need to sort of move that back towards the middle a little bit. And COVID has been an opportunity for us to really consider what does the standardized testing tell us? What is our question? And then how are we going to find out the answer to that question, right? So do we really need to know an IQ score again, or do we really already understand the student's level of innate ability, and we're looking at whether or not their academic achievement has been interrupted, or is it the best time to give that academic achievement testing, or do we want to wait 3 months and see what re-engaging in school does for that student while they, because everybody has shown regression during this time. Students have been away from school for a long time. There's going to be regression. In a typical school year, we say that, by Columbus Day weekend, that is when we start teaching new concepts to students, that we really use that first 6 weeks of school to re-instruct on concepts from the end of the previous school year.
Great. Chris, well, I know we're just wrapping up with 1 minute to go. Again, thank you everyone for this really active participation. I probably look really weird if I take my my video off. I'm just in a dark room, but again, this was riveting. We've had over 100 participants. I know we're going to have a lot of views here on the recording. Thank you again for your time. Thank you to all of our honored guests this evening, administrators, teachers, parents, advocates, community leaders, school committee members, union leaders, everyone together. So we really appreciate it. And
thank you, everybody. If something gets transpired from this, putting up this video, that looks like I have misconveyed, or there's another question that comes out of this, please have people get back to me.
Yep.
I'm a human being sitting on my porch here in the dark, trying to make sense out of what I know in my head, what my experiences are, what my professional work is. But there's, lean in, help me to understand what you heard, help me to re-explain something, or, this is a real human being out here trying to talk to you guys, saying, like, we got this, but we got to do it together.
We're right here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you.
I just have a great night. Thank you, Chris. We just had a wrap-up statement. So just on behalf of the Special Parent Advisory Council meeting, we just invite you to continue to come along this journey. So right after this, we're going to go ahead and be able to, as soon as we get the recording, to post that up. I will get the slides up right away on our website. And we really invite your engagement, right? This only works when we're all together, when we're all communicating, right? And it comes, there are escalation points. So use us as a special ed parent committee. On behalf, I'm one of the support secretaries. We have an amazing group of chairs and resources and a great relationship. So that's what we're trying to do: build relationships, build transparency, build communication, right? So it only fixes when we only know there's a problem when we talk about it. So in any case, we love you all and thinking of you, and we'll have another follow-up meeting in about 2 weeks. So please stay tuned, and you'll get minutes, notes, all that stuff. Again, keep your questions coming, and we'll have more of your questions answered if we get to get to them tonight. So, all right.
Thank you.
Great. Excellent. And Malia is our liaison. Just to make a note, Malia Gustafson, she is our school committee liaison, so please feel free to email her. Our wonderful teams, chairs, we have Melissa Martin, Rachel, Nicole, Judy, Lynn. So again, Carol, thank you very much. Yes, hi Malia.
Michelle, can I make a quick comment on the calendar since it came up several times?
Sure, yes, please.
Just to clarify, the dates we've been working with are what we are hoping, but the calendar is not officially finalized in terms of the last day of school until the school committee votes on it, and the next meeting is not until the 24th. So that's the earliest we'll have anything finalized. I can't speak on behalf of the committee, but from a timing perspective, we have to approve the calendar after it's agreed upon with the unions, and that's the next meeting. So that's the earliest we could tell you the last day of school, for example.
Great.
So, but we're working with this. Thank you.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, so much. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Again, the email for the CPAC is wrsdsepac@gmail.com. You can also message on Facebook. and reach out to any of the members. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll stay on for a moment if anyone has any, any questions. I'll just stop the recording here.